start. So thanks, Peter, for starting the recording. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. It's been a little while since we all gathered. So welcome back to the NL seminar. And I hope you have had a good start to the summer. Today, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Xiang Lisa Lee. Lisa is a first-year PhD student in computer science at Stanford University, advised by Percy Liang and Tatsunori Hashimoto. She works on controllable text generation / decoding and efficient adaptation of pre-trained language models. Lisa is supported by Stanford Graduate Fellowship and is the recipient of an EMLP Best Paper Award. I'm really excited about her talk. Please all join me in welcoming Lisa and enjoying her talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mo. Also, thanks for inviting me. Let me screen share first. Cool. Can you all see the screen? Okay, great. So hello. Today I'm gonna talk about prefix tuning, optimizing continuous prompts for generation. And this is joint work with Percy Liang. So here is GPT-2. It's great and can be used for all these tasks, but it is 1.5 billion parameters. Now what happens if we fine-tune for summarization? 1.5 billion parameters. Fine-tune for table to text, another 1.5 billion parameters. As we fine-tune for more tasks, the amount of parameters we need to store scales linearly with the number of tasks. So fine-tuning can be very expensive when we have large language models, because it requires updating and storing a full model copy for each task. On the other extreme, we have GPT-3 and its in-context learning framework. For example, we can write some instruction to describe the task and give some examples as demonstration. We concatenate the instruction, the example, and the input and pass them to GPT-3 as a prompt. And GPT-3 will generate this output, which summarizes the input table. So you might think that GPT-3 gets around the problem of having to save large fine-tuned models. And indeed, when we apply in-context learning, we just need to write down different prompts for different tasks. So we don't need to do any task-specific training. However, in-context learning also introduces some disadvantages. First, we couldn't exploit very large training sets, because GPT-3 has a bounded length context window, and that is, it can only attend to a bounded number of tokens. So when we have a training set that's longer than the context window, in-context learning cannot fully exploit that training set. And second, we have to manually come up with the prompt. So for example, we have to write down the instruction and select some demonstrations. However, this manually written prompt may be suboptimal and requires human labor to do this. And third, in-context learning is kind of unique to GPT-3, and it does not generalize well to smaller models like GPT-2. So here is the axis that marks the number of trainable parameters. We have fine-tuning on one end and in-context learning on the other end. And prefix tuning is somewhere in the middle. And here's a sketch of our method. We freeze the pre-trained language model parameters as shown in gray, and instead only optimize the small prefix for each task as shown in pink. So the number of parameters in the prefix is 1,000 times fewer than the full language model parameters. And for example, it takes around 250K for each task. So in contrast to fine-tuning, it is very lightweight because we freeze the pre-trained language model and only optimize the prefix. So for each task, we only need to store this very small prefix. So as the number of tasks increases, the overhead is very small. And second, prefix tuning addresses the issue of in-context learning by having this prefix to be trainable. So we train the prefix using gradient-based method, which easily scales to large training set. And also, since the prefix is trainable, we don't have to manually specify them. And the prefix would be more optimal than the human written prompt. Furthermore, in-context learning is a unique framework that only works with large GPT-3 models, whereas prefix tuning allows us to generalize this prompting idea to smaller models like GPT-2 and BART. So here we include some other related work to the axis. Tuning the top K layers is a common practice for large fine-tuned models, and normally K equals to 1 or 2, and it takes around 20% of total language model parameters. It's 20% because you always also tune the language model head, which is a lot of parameters. And also there is adapter tuning. It is another parameter efficient way to adapt language model for downstream tasks. It freezes the pre-trained parameters and instead adds some trainable MLP layers between each layer of the language model. So effectively, it's making the pre-trained language model deeper because it inserts additional MLP layers in between. And those MLP layers are the trainable parameters. So overall, we call this group of methods lightweight fine-tuning, which tries to freeze most of the language model parameters and insert some small trainable modules in order to adapt for some downstream tasks. So when we tune only the top K layers, normally we see a performance drop compared with fine-tuning. And when we do adapter tuning, it is moderately lightweight, and we have 30 times fewer trainable parameters than fine-tuning. And at the same time, we maintain a comparable performance. So for prefix tuning, it is even more lightweight. We now have 1,000 times fewer parameters than fine-tuning, and still maintains a comparable performance to fine-tuning. So here's the outline of my presentation. I will first talk about the intuition and method of prefix tuning, and then we'll go to some experiments and ablation studies, and finally some discussions. So from a high level, prefix tuning draws inspiration from prompting. So assume that we have a pre-trained GPT-2 model. The basic functionality is to compute next word probability given previous words. For example, Harry Potter graduated from blank, and the language model will compute this next word distribution. It will assign high probability to Hogwarts, lower probability to Oxford, and very low probability to is, because it's not grammatical. Our goal now is to make the language model have high probability of generating a particular word, like Hogwarts. So one simple thing we can do is to update the language model parameters in favor of that word. But what can we do if we're not allowed to update any parameters? We have Hogwarts, and P of Hogwarts unigram is going to be quite low. However, the intuition here is that we can prepend a proper context and use this context as a prompt to boost the conditional probability. So by conditioning on the proper context, we can steer the language model to generate a particular word. And we can extend this intuition to generate a particular phrase or a sentence. So now we want to further extend this intuition to a more useful setting. Like, can we find a context that can steer the language model to solve an NLG task? For example, this table to text task that requires us to summarize the table content X and output some textual description Y. So one natural context to try is the task instruction, like this, summarize the following table. In this case, it would be like we would hope to have P of Y given Tx, where T is the instruction, to be much greater than P of Y given X for this task instruction to be effective. However, empirically, the task instruction might be able to guide a human, but it fails for moderately sized language models like GPT-2 or BART. So how to fix this problem and find some context that can really steer GPT-2 for an NLG task? So the solution is that we should optimize the instruction. Option 1 is to optimize the discrete instruction via discrete optimization. So as shown in the figure, we try to select good W1 and W2 from the vocabulary, such that prepending them would steer the generation of Y conditioned on W1, W2, and X. However, the caveats are that discrete optimization is hard, and we are constrained to choosing words from the vocabulary, which is not very expressive. And option 2 is to optimize the instruction as continuous word embeddings. So here, we optimize the input embedding of the first 2 slots, E1 and E2. And this is more expressive than option 1. And this is easier to compute because we now have a differentiable function. But it is still constrained because we rely on the pre-trained parameters to compute the upper layers of the transformers. So option 3 is to optimize the prefix activations of all the layers. Say that GPT-2 has 12 layers, then we would be optimizing all the 12 activation layers on top of these first 2 slots. It is more expressive because we allow the top layers of the prefix to also be directly trainable. And this is what we use for prefix tuning.
Sorry, may I ask a question here?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just to make sure I understand correctly, the difference between the second and third approach is that in the second approach, the basically the instruction representations are only entered at the first layer, and the corresponding representation at the later layers are computed by the attention mechanism. But in the third approach, you have this thing inserted at every layer itself. So also the later layers, they have their own corresponding representation, and not calculated by the attention mechanism. Am I right?
Yeah, right.
Got it.
So basically, like you can kind of think of like the optimizing all layer version as like you are basically overriding what the transformer attention would have computed.
Exactly.
And replace those with trainable parameters.
I see. Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to the next slide. So for this presentation, I will focus on table to text as our example task. And the goal here is to obtain a good model P of y given x, which generates the textual description conditioned on the input table. So the popular paradigm that people use to adapt a pre-trained model for the task is to fine-tune GPT-2 for this task. So we will first go through some notation. Here we concatenate x and y to get z, and the indexing is from 1 to 12. So we pass this z autoregressively to the language model and compute the activation vector hi at each time step. So hi is computed by activations of the left context and the input at time step I. And here, phi refers to the pre-trained language model parameters. So we use x sub-index to denote all the indices that correspond to x, and y sub-index to denote all the indices that correspond to y. And our objective is as follows, which is equal to the sum of log probability of generating each tokens in y at each time step. So in prefix tuning, we will prepend this trainable prefix, h1 and h2. We have this matrix p theta that stores the trainable prefix parameters. Its dimension is prefix length times the dimension of activation vector. And we compute the activation at each time step using this equation. So the activations that correspond to the prefix are free parameters. And here it refers to h1 and h2.
Sorry, interrupt for a second. What's the difference between y and z?
What's the
difference between y and z?
Y and z. Okay, so z is the concatenation of x and y.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because like in GPT-2, there is no explicit encoder. So you have to put it in the prefix or the left context in order to kind of use it as an encoder.
Got it.
Yeah. So we compute the activation at each time step using this equation, and the activation that corresponds to the prefix are free parameters. So here we are referring to h1 and h2. The subsequent activations are computed using the language model recurrence formula that we have seen on the previous slide. Note that all the activations will depend on our prefix parameter p theta, because the first several activations, h1 and h2, for example, are copied directly from p theta, and all the latter activations depend on their left context, which include h1 and H2. So we have the same objective as fine-tuning, except for the set of trainable parameters. Here we are freezing the language model parameter phi and only optimizing the prefix parameter theta. So in the paper, we'll also discuss how to apply prefix tuning to encoder-decoder architectures like BART. We will skip the details here, but basically we pre-plan this trainable prefix to both the encoder and the decoder.
Hi, I have a quick question here, just to
Yeah.
clarify. The H1 and H2 here, are they the same for different x, or they are different today?
Yeah, they are the same for different x. So
So it means like it's like a for task specific prefix, and all the examples are the same. Share the same.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
This is also what makes this lightweight, because if it is a function of the x, then it has to do this step of computation, which takes into x and map it to the dimension of the activations, which will be an MLP that is quite large. So in that case, it will not be space efficient.
Do you think you could have, I guess it would be an infix instead of a prefix, where you're just not categorical? So you just have like, you generate a pseudo vocabulary item and put that in, and like essentially you just basically just kind of get a couple of more free parameters to play with before you actually start decoding the target.
So do you mean like basically instead of doing prefix XY, we're doing X infix Y?
Well, I mean, in addition to, but there, instead of having, I mean, here you learn the prefix and those are imposed, right? You declare this is H1 and this is H2.
Right.
I was thinking to do something a little bit more item specific. You basically could have like a couple, it's like you could have thinking steps, right? Before you get to the target where you don't have a label, right? Because you don't have to, there's nothing to choose, but you just kind of like generate a pseudo embedding and then put that in and basically just like, you think of it as like taking a couple of walking steps before you decide to do the decoding.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. So it depends on how you plan to parameterize the middle thinking steps. So basically, if you still want to replace the middle thinking steps with like completely free parameters for all layers, then that's not useful because that would be equivalent as if you put it in the front. But like if you
no, because it would be generated conditionally on whatever X is.
I mean, like if you directly parameterize it in the same way that we parameterize the prefix, like basically just overriding all the computation by the transformer for those two steps, then that's the same, right? That's the same as just elongating the prefix. But if you like try to parameterize the infix in a more like residual based way, so like you probably kind of use the GPT-2 model to compute some of the embeddings, and then you add some other trainable embeddings on top of that. I feel like that is probably gonna, it might be helpful, but I don't have a good intuition about how much more helpful that's gonna be. Because presumably, like it will basically just, you are trying to find some representation that takes in function X and also takes in the free prefix parameters to get some middle representation in between. Whereas the early layers of the transformer, like the early layers for corresponding to Y could also have done similar things. So I mean, from an expressiveness perspective, you are not necessarily like making the model more expressive by changing the architecture.
But did you try different prefix lengths?
I tried different prefix lengths. And
there's a difference, right?
Yeah, and there's a difference.
So I mean, theoretically, that shouldn't be true either, but it is in practice.
I see. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Maybe we should try that as well.
I'm sorry, I'll let you keep on going.
Yeah. So yeah, now let's move on to experiments and ablation studies. So here's an experiment on the E2E dataset, which is a table to text dataset on restaurant reviews. So here's one example drawn from the E2E dataset. And we have table fields like name, customer rating, area, and food type. So the x-axis is the percentage of trainable parameters, and the y-axis is generation performance evaluated using blue. So we compare the following method. The blue dot represents full fine-tuning with 100% trainable parameters. The left blue dot represents fine-tuning just the top 2 layers, taking around 22% trainable parameters, and we can see a slight performance drop. The green dot represents adapter tuning with 3% trainable parameters, and we can see a performance gain compared with full fine-tuning. The left green dot represents adapter tuning with 0.1% parameters. And when we go from 3% to 0.1%, there is a large performance gap in adapter tuning. So the orange dot, the orange dot here is prefix tuning with 0.1% parameters. And here prefix tuning has better performance than adapter tuning and fine tuning, while only using 0.1% total parameters.
Yeah, hi Lisa, I have a quick question about the adapter with 0.1% of parameters. Are you reducing the width of each adapter, or are you reducing the you make the adapter only on the top K layers, or?
Oh, good question. So basically, when you implement adapters, you basically insert MLPs between layers, right? Mm-hmm. And then those MLPs are like 2-layer MLPs. So there is like a middle layer that's the bottleneck of the adapters. Mm-hmm. So 0.1% meaning that we are reducing that bottleneck. So,
yeah, I recall in the adapter paper, they also did ablation. They found that most of the adapters in the previous K layer are not that important. So they actually remove all the adapters between the layer 1 to layer, let's say 8 or something, and they only keep the adapters for the top K layers, and they found that's still performing the same, similar.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe that's a better ablation that will give more credits to adapters. But comparatively, so say that for simply reducing the number of layers to do adapters is probably not sufficient to reduce parameters to 0.1%. But you probably have to do a combination of the two, which is gonna be a good thing to optimize for. Yeah, cool. Thanks for that point. And we also try on the WebNLG dataset. So each example in this dataset is labeled with 1 category. The training set contains examples from 9 categories. And 1 example category is comic characters, which is also the example that I have here on the right. It is an example about Baymax, and the format of X is a sequence of entity, predicate, entity, triple. So the test data has 2 splits. The first split is the 9 categories during training. And the second split is the 5 unseen categories. So we will talk about the 5 unseen categories later when we talk about extrapolation performance. But for now, we will report the results of the first test split, which contains in-domain examples from the 9 training categories. So here, prefix tuning has a comparable performance with fine-tuning, and it strongly outperforms adapter with 0.1% parameters. And this is our third dataset, DART. It is an open domain dataset because it uses open domain tables from Wikipedia. So here's an example. It has the same data format as the WebNLG dataset. That is, it has a sequence of entity, predicate, entity triples, and tries to write a textual description of the sequence. So we observe a similar trend. And the general takeaway from this set of experiments is that first, prefix tuning is an effective and space-efficient method to adapt GPT-2 to table-to-text generation. And second, it is more parameter efficient than adapter tuning, significantly reducing parameters while improving generation qualities. So we also tried our method on abstractive summarization. Instead of using GPT-2, we use BART as our base model. And we will, basically for details, we as we said before, we prepend the prefix to both the encoder and the decoder. So we use the XM dataset here, which contains news articles from BBC. And here is one example. So the blue dot represents full fine tuning, and the two orange dots represent prefix tuning with different parameter levels. So we see that with 2% parameters, prefix tuning obtains slightly lower performance than fine tuning for summarization task. And we suspect that this drop in performance is caused by the nature of summarization task, which is more complex than table to text. So summarization requires the encoder to extract key contents from a very long document. And we think that prefix tuning, the encoder is the bottleneck here. So the takeaway here is that with 2% parameters, prefix tuning obtains slightly worse performance than fine tuning. And this might be an expressivity issue because we are only allowing like updating the prefix parameters. So we also observed some interesting results about prefix tuning's extrapolation performance. So first, what do I mean by extrapolation? Recall the WebNLG dataset where we train on 9 categories and test on 5 unseen categories. So for the training categories, here's an example on building. And for the unseen categories, here's an example on artist. Note that there may be some shared predicates between the seen and the unseen categories, but there are more predicates and noun phrases that are unique to each particular categories, such as architect for building and like genre for artist. And this is where the extrapolation performance matters. So here's the extrapolation performance. These bars represent methods that preserve the pre-trained language model. By preserving the pre-trained language model, I mean that the pre-trained parameters are kept intact and some additional trainable modules are instead updated. So methods that fall into these categories are prefix tuning and adapter tuning. And here are the set of methods that fine-tune most of the language model, meaning that most of the language model parameters are updated. So the overall takeaway here is that methods that preserve the pre-trained language model achieves better extrapolation than those that fine-tunes most of the language model. So this is an interesting result, and we will discuss this later in the discussions. So here's an ablation study on the impact of prefix length. So as Jonathan has said, prefix length means like more prefix length would be more expressive. So prefix length here, I mean the number of prepended slots that has trainable activations. And we have this axis of expressiveness. So on the top, we have a prefix length of 2, which is expected to be less expressive than prefix length of 3, etc. And here are the empirical results. So on the left side, we have summarization task evaluated on Rouge 2 and Rouge L on the left and right axis. So we can see that the performance increases with the prefix length up to some value, and in this case, it's 200. And on the other side, we have table to text task evaluated on blue and translation error rate. So for blue, it's the higher the better, which is the red line. And for TER, which is the lower the better, the blue line here. And we can observe a similar trend that the performance increases with the prefix length up to some value, but the value varies with tasks. And here the performance of prefix tuning saturates when prefix length is around 10.
Hi, Lisa. I have another question about the number of the prefix tokens.
Right.
So when in the previous slides, when you say 0.1% of parameters, at that time, how many prefix tokens were you using?
So I think 0.1 is like 5 to 10 would both fall into the 0.1% parameters.
But this could be very specific to data size. Like XSum here in your curve is like if you use 200 prefix token, that's the best performance.
Right. Yeah, if I use 200 tokens, it's kind of around 3% parameters total, I think.
I see. So that's close to adapter.
Yeah. That is close to adapters in terms of the number of parameters.
And when you compute the parameters, the real size of the parameters for prefix, is it like the number of the length of the prefix and times the number of the layers and times the dimension? Is that how you estimate the parameter size?
Right. Yeah, that's how I estimate the parameter size. I guess like one difference is that maybe like because I am parameterizing the key value pairs independently. So you probably want to also time two to that number.
I see.
There would be prefix list times the number of layers times the dimension times the model dimension times two, which is like because you have a key vector and a value vector for each latent activations.
Oh, I see.
So you actually just do treat the prefix tokens like they're tokens after you insert them, right? Which means that you have, for example, self-attention between prefix token 1 and prefix token 3, right?
No, I don't have self-attention between prefix token 1 and prefix
I mean,
token
higher up in the transformer layers, no?
No. Like they are all free parameters.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's
kind of
just
like
like feed forward stuff.
Ah, I see.
They do affect the attention of the rest of tokens because
Yeah.
of course they get accounted for when calculating representation for the actual tokens, but themselves they just are free and go up using this free parameters.
Oh, I see. Wait,
Right.
so sorry. So is there a corresponding is there a corresponding vector at each level for
Yeah, there is a corresponding vector at each level.
how is that one? And that one is not calculated as the result of feed forward plus self-attention and layer norm and blah blah blah.
Right, exactly. It's basically like intervention. Like instead of using the pre-trained attention and feed forward to compute the upper layers on the prefix stuff, they are computed like they are directly intervened and they are free parameters.
Okay, good. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Although it seems like in terms of like actually just like, inserting it into the, if you just wanted to not do any coding, right, you could just like add these and deal with the fact that you're attending between things that you don't need to attend to. Did you by any chance try that? Like, it seems like that would be the, like, I don't know, just the easiest way to get going.
Like by saying that, do you mean like only perturbing the embedding? Like, do you mean like doing this type of residual stuff where you have these free parameters, but like instead of directly intervening and changing the upper layers to those free parameters, you first do the computation and then add them, and then use the resulting vector to do the computation for the upper layers?
What I mean is, like, say, if I was just going to implement this, right, as fast as I could,
Right.
what I would do is I would define 10 vocabulary tokens that don't otherwise exist in the vocabulary. I would always use those vocabulary tokens at the beginning of every sentence. And then I would just let the transformer work, right? And like basically not have to do any coding. It would just be the act of like every input starts with talk 1, talk 2, talk 3, talk 4, talk 5, etc. Right? And like the downside is you get self-attention between talk 1 and talk 3, which is totally unnecessary. But
yeah. Yeah, so this leads to a good transition to the next slide, which exactly compares the differences between these two. So the version that you were talking about is like we call it the embedding only ablation. Because like in this case, only like in the figures, only the pink part are optimizable. So in the embedding only version, the pink part is the zeroth layer, which is the embedding layer, which is equivalent as if you just create 5 virtual tokens and then optimize their embeddings. Is that what you mean?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, cool. So we also study this like embedding only ablation compared with prefix tuning. So recall that we have discussed this ablation as an option for optimizing the task instruction by only doing the embedding layer. So as shown in the bottom left bar plot, we can see that indeed there is a large performance gap between prefix tuning and embedding only ablation. So the takeaway here is that tuning only the embedding layer is not sufficiently expressive. So also like embedding only ablation should upper bounds the performance of optimizing over discrete words so that we will have the following implication that prefix tuning works much better than both optimizing the embedding and optimizing the discrete words. Yeah, I hope this slide kind of answers the question.
Yeah, great, thank you.
And finally, we will move on to discussions. So one of the interesting settings where prefix tuning can be very useful is personalization. So we have many large pre-trained language models. And these large pre-trained language models can be useful for many downstream tasks. And one example would be autocomplete system. So suppose that we have many users for this system, like millions of users, for example. Because different users may have very different writing styles, and we want the autocomplete system to address them all. Now the question is how to deploy the language model to adapt to different users' writing styles. So we can regard each user as an independent task. And one option is to do multitask learning. Basically, we can mix the user data and train a single model under the joint objective. However, the downside is that it will sacrifice user privacy because we mix up user data during training. And also, it is hard to add or delete users. We may introduce a new user if we directly train on that user's data without revisiting other users' data. It might suffer from catastrophic forgetting. And therefore, if we add a new user, we have to revisit all the old users' data, which is troublesome and slow. But the good side is storage efficiency, because we only need to store one model. So how do we address the first two issues? For privacy and flexibility, we basically want to keep user data separate and train independently. Or more precisely, like if we make the method more like modular, then we are able to kind of address the first two issues. So one such solution is that we can fine-tune for each user independently. It addresses the first two problems because it avoids cross-contamination of user data. And we can add a new user by just fine-tuning a new model on that user's data. However, this is very storage inefficient because we have to save a large model for each user, which is not scalable when we have a large number of users. And option 3 is to use prefix tuning and train a personalized prefix for each user. In this way, we can preserve user privacy by training separately, and we allow for easy addition or deletion of users by training or removing their personalized prefix. And this is also storage efficient because the overhead for each additional user is very small. So we only need to save this very small prefix. And under the same personalization setting, prefix tuning allows batching across different users' queries, even though they are backed by different prefixes. So when multiple users query a cloud GPU device with their inputs, it is computationally efficient to put these users in the same batch. Prefix tuning keeps the shared language model intact. Consequently, batching requires a simple step of prepending the personalized prefix to user input. And all the remaining computation is unchanged. So in contrast, it is hard to batch across different users in other lightweight fine-tuning methods. For example, in adapter tuning, we need to distribute the queries when we are between two layers of the language model and pass them to different adapter modules depending on the users, which requires more engineering effort and can be very slow. So the takeaway here is that since the language model is shared, we could batch across users with different personalized prefixes. And more than just batching across users in a personalization setting, this approach could also kind of encourage the idea of having ensembles with large pre-trained models. So basically you can train like different prefixes on like different subsets of data or even on exactly the same data. And then you can like use each of the learned prefixes as an expert. And then during test time, you could batch them together to make a joint prediction about a particular input examples.
I think I might have missed something.
Mm-hmm.
I understand if for the embedding only case
Mm-hmm.
that your model can exist on cloud wherever, and then you send in your prefix,
Mhm.
your embeddings, right, that
Mhm.
are specific to your user, and then you get a custom answer.
Mhm.
But if I understood the difference that we were talking about before, where there's different free parameters at every level, that means
Right.
you have to send in, I mean, the prefix is really the prefix at every level, right? You have to send in this whole parameter stack.
Right. Yeah.
That, okay,
Yeah.
so
But that doesn't impact batching, right? So both the embedding only and the prefix tuning will be will have this type of batching benefit. Like for example, because like when you are trying to compute for a transformer models, you can do this type of pre-computation, such as you can kind of interpret the prefix as the pre-computed things.
I see.
Like in Hugging Face, it would be something called the past key value pairs or past key values that you could directly feed into the model input.
So the actual implementation is like, this is level 0, this is level 1, all the way up to level 12 for prefix token 1, and then prefix token 2, etc. Right?
Right. Yeah. So like you basically pass more things to the model because the prefix is like at multiple layers. But like when it really gets to trying to compute the vat vectors in the figure, like the activation vectors for the subsequent tokens, you could batch across prefixes because there is nothing that force you to have exactly the same prefix in order to batch for transformers, if that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas I mean, in the adapter case, you really have different modules in between. So with those different modules, you kind of have to pipe your output at layer I to another model, to another MLP, or to different MLPs depending on the user, and then pipe them back to the language model. Whereas in this case, because the prefix parameters can kind of be interpreted as some internal representations in transformers, like it allows for easy batching and also easy implementation. If you use Hugging Face to implement, you just need to pass the trained parameters to pass key value pairs. So, yeah.
I have a quick question about the comparison to multitask.
Uh-huh.
So if we leave aside the concerns about privacy,
Mhm.
which is a big concern, but one of the benefits of multitask might be that there's some kind of similarities between users that is learned, and the performance might be higher as a result of these similarities.
Right.
I'm wondering if in the prefix scheme, you can have a set of prefixes that are, individual to each user, but then another K prefixes that are shared between users. So you kind of get the benefits of multitask along with the personalization.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, definitely. So, but so if we completely forget about privacy concerns, then yes, that will work. Because like you have shared prefixes, or I mean, like if you just drop the privacy constraints, but still want to like keep this personalization idea, then yes, you could train like on shared data, you could train a prefix, and then for each individual, you could then like further train another prefix on top of the prefix model to adapt it for each individual users. But like for privacy considerations, I mean, like even if you still want to like preserve differential privacy constraints, for example, like using prefix tuning would be better than fully fine-tuned models, because prefix tuning only tunes a very small amount of parameters, and like looking at the number of trainable parameters in a differential privacy setting will be related to how private the final model is going to be, because like there are very few ways your models can leak user data, because you only have very small trainable parameters.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, and also like prefix tuning is like with careful initialization, prefix tuning can be good for for few shot settings. So in that case, it kind of alleviates the issue of having to consider like separating to only train on a small part of user data, I guess. That's also vaguely related.
Yeah, I see that. That's an interesting point.
Cool. So finally, let's discuss more about the advantages and inductive bias of preserving the pre-trained language model. So the philosophy of prefix tuning is to preserve the pre-trained language model as much as possible. And recalling the experiment results on extrapolation, methods that preserve the language model strongly outperform those that fine-tune most of the language model parameters. The exact reason for such an improvement is an open problem, but we have some intuition for why this might help. So a language model is pre-trained on large and general purpose corpus. So inherently, it might be good at generalization to different domains. And fine-tuning exploits language model by using them as initialization points. And if you fine-tune aggressively, it might suffer from catastrophic forgetting, which leads to the bad performance out of domain. And we could better exploit pre-trained language model by preserving most of its parameters. So prefix tuning is one such attempt because it freezes the model parameters, so there is no way that it can catastrophically forget. And our code is available here. So, well, if you go to the repo, please go to the cleaned branch because the cleaned branch has much better coding style than the master branch, I think. So let's move on to related work. The idea of optimizing a continuous prefix or prompt is a hot topic recently, and we call this class of work P-star tuning, since the other instances like P-tuning and prompt tuning all starts with P. Well, first, you may recognize familiar names on this paper. So this is concurrent work. It also focuses on using soft prompts as a lightweight approach to adapt a pre-trained mass language model for downstream tasks. So this work primarily focuses on NLU and classification tasks, like the glue benchmark. We basically have a similar conclusion that like P-star tuning is a very competitive method given how few parameters it needs to update. And it is more parameter efficient than adapters. The work also shows that P-star tuning has good few-shot learning performance when carefully initialized. So the primary difference between this and prefix tuning is that prefix tuning updates the entire layers of the prefix activations, whereas WARP updates only the embedding layer. So the trade-off is that updating all layers will increase the number of trainable parameters, but it will also make it more expressive. So this paper suggests that having a mixture of soft prompts can better elicit factual knowledge from pre-trained language models. So this is an interesting application of P-star tuning to knowledge extraction and linking P-star tuning to the ensemble idea because they have a mixture of prompts. And the work shows that this type of learned prompts significantly outperform the human written prompt or the optimized discrete prompts. And additionally, this work about GPT understands too trains autoregressive language models like GPT-2 by tuning its soft prompts. So previously, people have believed that autoregressive models are not as good as masked language models for NLU tasks because they don't have bidirectional context. And the authors show here that P-tuning is a better technique than fine-tuning when we are considering autoregressive models for understanding tasks. They have also shown that jointly tuning the prefix and the model parameters can attain good few-shot performance on the superglue benchmarks. And this is also a related paper. The power of scale paper is a follow-up work that builds upon the prior work. They consider prompt tuning for pre-trained T5 models of different scales and show that as the model gets bigger, the performance gap between prompt tuning and full fine-tuning gets smaller and eventually disappears. So this is a really good news because the cost of tuning very large models can be prohibitively high. And it appears that we could do very lightweight prompt tuning and get equally good performance as the model gets larger and larger. This is also a quite interesting observation. This is kind of related to the intrinsic dimension idea that large pre-trained models tends to have very small intrinsic dimensions, suggesting that maybe the large models doesn't really require much tuning to be able to adapt well to a downstream task. And yeah, additionally, in this paper, they also study the ensemble of prompts, which has good batching benefit from an engineering perspective. And similar to the prefix tuning work, they show that prompt tuning is better at extrapolating to out-of-domain examples for NLI tasks, I think. Yeah, and that's it for the presentation. I'm happy to get questions.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, thanks for a great talk. Yeah, I have a few quick questions here. So in your experiments, you only talk about the generation NLG data sets. So is there a technical reason why you couldn't use any NLU tasks for experiments?
Why I couldn't use any what tasks for experiments?
The glue benchmark data sets, like classification stuff.
Yeah, actually, I mean, there is no particular reason. I mean, like for the paper, we just decide to focus on generation, but this method should be like definitely extendable to like classification tasks.
I see. But adapter paper is only about NLU tasks. So for comparing, to give a more like comparison, that I guess that would be very helpful for readers.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess like another related reason that we're mostly thinking about NLG tasks is that we kind of want the task to be like as in domain to the pre-training objective as possible. So I mean, for NLU tasks, there are definitely ways to like rewrite the question to make it look more like the training setting for GPT-2.
Yes. I got it.
Or like simply if we care more about like the mask language model based approach, then like maybe extending the warp work to be deeply perturbed. So basically, like, perturbing also the upper layers of the transformer would be very similar to prefix tuning.
Given the comparisons that you showed, I think that's really going to be high priority for us because, right, you essentially showed what was warp was inferior to what you did for generation. There's no reason why that shouldn't be true. And we can see that at least the embedding only one works for NLU, right? Because
yeah, right. And I think similarly in the in Jason's paper on like learning how to ask, they also had this comparison in the appendix that they added later that compares deeply perturbed version and the embedding only approach, which there is also a significant gain when you perturb upper layers.
Yeah, I have another quick question. Like, so did you try to like remove a few, let's say the bottom layers of prefix parameters, or the top few, or you only have like 0 or 12, right? So did you have tried like only turn on like the top K or the bottom K prefix embeddings?
Great question. No, we didn't. But this would be a good way to keep reducing the number of parameters, like because then you don't have to optimize full layers. You could just optimize some chosen layers.
Thanks for the great talk.
Sorry, so just following up on Bill, the last question, that means sharing some of the prefix matrices between different layers, right? Instead of having, if I understand correctly, then that means that currently you have different free parameters for different layers. And what Bill was asking, if we can share them between layers, right?
I think Bill is asking like, I feel like there are different implementations of this idea. You could either share them, which might not be that good because like transformers doesn't really rely on like normally you wouldn't see like two layers have the same parameters. But I mean, if you like, there are two ways. You could either just drop some layer, like just do not attend to the first couple tokens for this particular layer, or you could like use the pre-trained feed forward or attention mechanisms to compute all the missing layers that you don't optimize.
I see. So sort of just the embedding only ablation, but instead of only embedding a couple of layers in between instead of all layers. Got it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Got it. Okay, then with that, First of all, thank you, Lisa. Perfect timing. Thank you so much for the talk. And
all the questions.
I think with that, I can officially open the floor for the after talk questions, if you have any.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I had a quick question. Well, whether you can use the H to get some kind of approximate interpretation about what the prefix is in terms of natural language. Like, can you use like a nearest neighbor to find the words that might be closest to what you're actually learning?
Great question. Actually, we have tried that, and I think we don't see any good like interpretable output when we do nearest neighbor. So I mean, like this is a bit similar to the auto prompt paper, where they do the discrete optimization. Like they directly optimize to find words in the vocabulary that would be able to steer the language model to do well for a particular task. However, the output of their methods, which are real tokens, so don't have to do nearest neighbor, are also not interpretable at all.
See.
Yeah.
See.
So it appears that like maybe for models that are on a scale of GPT-2, like doing this type of prompt tuning will not give you interpretable results. But I'm not sure how that will change as the model scales. Because for example, if you have like GPT-3, like the largest model of GPT-3, then like using human written prompt will give you a reasonable results. So if you try to optimize within those neighbor, you might be able to like recover like human language. So this might be a scale problem, not a method problem, but we don't know because we don't have access to GPT-3.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah.
Hi, Lisa. This is really impressive work, and I have a quick question. So, have you or considered to combine your method with the adapter, like put an adapter in the middle and put your method like prefix in front, and have you considered it?
I haven't thought very much about that, but that's definitely an interesting idea. So like similar to the GPT Understand 2 paper, like they tried combining prefix tuning with fine tuning. So basically they jointly tune the prefix and the model parameters. So what you are suggesting is that while model parameter is too expensive, instead of tuning all model parameters, we could just tune adapter layers as a like surrogate for model parameters. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. Yeah, but I haven't tried anything close to that.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. This is awesome work. I was really curious about the personalization use case, and I was wondering if you or anyone else have done experiments looking at this particular application and the output of it.
By the particular application, you mean the autocomplete systems, or you?
Yeah, or any sort of personalization task using this approach. Or
interesting. Yeah. I think I have friends from Stanford who are doing like follow-up work on like differential privacy. It's not like 100% privacy preserving, but it is a very strong criteria for preserving like privacy user data. And then yeah, in that setting, like I guess the intuition is that optimizing a smaller number of parameters will give you a better bound for differential privacy.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the like evaluation of the actual effectiveness of the personalization itself. Like, does it actually generate different text for different people? So I was just curious if anyone has done something like that before.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, but I'm yeah, sorry, I don't have a.
Oh no, it's cool. Well, maybe my team should do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to add, actually, I'm working on some like a federated learning for NLP project. So we will release some data set about personalization and federated learning, scenarios. So maybe Melissa, we can maybe talk about that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? Okay, then in that case, I think we all can thank Lisa for the great talk, really great discussions, and we give her a little break before the one-on-ones. Thank you all for attending, and thank you again.